Hi, it's Dr. Silva. Thanks for joining me. I'm here to talk to you about performance anxiety. Performance anxiety is a form of anticipatory anxiety that we're all familiar with. We probably all felt it at one time or another. If you have to give a talk, or if you have to lead a meeting, or for some people heading into social situations like going to a party, there could be, especially if a person has social phobia, has actually a separate condition that's actually a baseline diagnosis where they're anxious about interpersonal interactions, just at their baseline, they could have a significant performance anxiety where the performance is just being social, just carrying on a conversation. And you could also feel performance anxiety before a sexual encounter. Again, it's a form of anticipatory anxiety. But when it results in significant impairment, or when there are a lot of physical symptoms, we could actually call it a symptom that is excessive and irrational. I remember the first time I ever had a panic attack was right before I gave a speech to the entire freshman student body. I was running for freshman class president. And it's funny because in preparing the speech, I didn't have any anxiety. I guess I wasn't thinking far enough ahead. I didn't have any anxiety in the morning of, or as I prepared my note cards. But then right before I went on, I realized that I would be under the scrutiny of however many hundreds of people. And I had a full-fledged panic attack. My heart started beating out of my chest. I wanted to turn and run. Of course I couldn't. I had to go through with it. And I won, by the way, so I guess I did okay. But that was a form of anticipatory anxiety that I didn't even feel until it was too late. And then it came at me all at one time in a huge panic attack. The first time I ever experienced it, I was in the second grade. I was 6 years old, and it was the Thanksgiving pageant. And I had memorized a poem that I was going to go on stage and recite. So I wasn't nervous because I was too little to be nervous. I had never been on stage before. It was also my debut. My stage debut. So I walked out on stage and I made the mistake. I made the grave error of looking out into the audience, and they seemed unfriendly. I remember thinking to myself, this is a hostile crowd. It really wasn't, but they weren't smiling. It unnerved me. I thought they looked none too happy. And anyway, I burst into tears. It didn't occur to me to do anything other than stand there and bawl my eyes out. And the teacher came out, took me by the shoulders, and led me off stage. I'm sure that was much more entertaining than the actual poem that I was supposed to read, but I'll never forget it. And that was my first brush. Talk about the anxiety coming too late. I was already on stage when it hit me. Nobody told me to expect this anxiety over people scrutinizing me and judging me harshly. It was in that moment that life taught me a very difficult lesson, which is when you're being scrutinized by other people who are also going to judge you, they might not judge you favorably. They might not like what they hear. And that's just something that you have to contend with. And some people have a harder time contending with that fact than other people. So some people get more performance anxiety than others. And because you're not allowed as an adult to burst into tears, this video is going to propose some remedies, some ways of heading performance anxiety off at the pass. Even afterwards, I didn't know what had just happened to me. I was too young. I was too young to have learned that lesson about, hey, there's something to fear when it comes to other people judging you. But I suddenly, for the first time in my life, I was discovering that there was something to be afraid of. And it just kind of hit me like a ton of bricks. You would think that 10 years later, when I'm in high school, that I would have remembered that, but it didn't hit me when I was giving my speech until like a few minutes before I was to go on stage. But anyhow, this video is going to talk about what you can do pharmacologically to minimize the risk. We're not allowed to start bawling our eyes out, and there's no one that's going to come and take us by the shoulders and lead us off stage into the safety of the wings. But there are certain things we can't help. Maybe we can refrain from bursting into tears, but there are things that we can't control. Things like sweating, and things like a pounding heart, and shallow breath, and shaking, tremors, and a quavering voice, or even a quivering lip. There are certain things that might come upon us if the anxiety is intense enough that we're not necessarily going to be able to manage all on our own. And maybe we can get a handle on that with some deep breathing and some meditative exercises prior to. Maybe we can talk ourselves off the cliff that way. But some of us really need medication if we want to conquer those outward signs, and specifically the use of beta blockers, beta adrenergic receptor antagonists. Medications that block the actions of epinephrine, adrenaline, by blocking the receptors that those hormones attach to. What's really nerve-wracking is the lead-up, and it often bleeds into the actual performance, whether it's giving a speech or leading a meeting or having sex, whatever it is. Because you're so nervous in the anticipation of it, it's the irrational fear of being humiliated, of being scrutinized, of embarrassing yourself. Even if you're completely competent to run the meeting or fully prepared to give the talk, it's stage fright that as the curtain time is approaching, you are having this mounting anxiety. The anxiety just gets worse and worse. And so there are things you can do, certainly non-pharmacological remedies. What I'm going to talk about are the pharmacological remedies, because that's my specialty. But if you want to know what you can do to talk yourself off the ledge, to meditate and deep breathe and do all those things. If the anxiety is very, very high, though, then you're not going to be able to talk yourself out of it just by deep breathing. It's too high. If, in fact, you need medication, if it's that severe, then what are your options? Well, one thing you could do is have a shot of alcohol. You don't need a prescription for that. And it may be ill-advised if you're an alcoholic, but it would work in much the same way as taking Xanax or Valium would work. It's not the exact same mechanism of action because there are actually benzodiazepine receptors in the body that once the benzodiazepine molecule attaches to that receptor subunit, then you get an increase in GABA aminobutyric acid, and that is the major inhibitory neurotransmitter in the central nervous system, so you get a diminution in your level of arousal. And in fact, if you take a higher dose, then it actually makes you sleepy, and it could actually be a good sleeping pill. But if you take a very low dose, then you relax and your anxiety level reduces. And also you become a bit disinhibited. And I think that's where the magic happens. It's not that you are slightly sedated, but it's the fact that you are disinhibited. And so you're less worried about what people are going to think, which also happens with alcohol. It's why people become expansive. Their guard is down and they don't worry so much about what people think about them. And so it's particularly effective for social anxiety, which, performance anxiety is a type of social anxiety. It's not social phobia in the sense of social anxiety disorder, but the fear that you're having is that you will fail to perform adequately on an interpersonal level, whether that's professional or in your non-professional life. The fear that you have is that of interfacing with your fellow human. And so anything that tends to reduce social anxiety, so alcohol works, benzodiazepines work, by increasing GABA. And that all boils down to increasing the influx of chloride anions into the cell. I'm not going to get that technical. Those treatments are fairly straightforward. You could also take a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. You could take a medication like Prozac or Paxil or Zoloft. These are SSRIs. They're medications that are antidepressants, but they're also excellent anti-anxiety agents, anxiolytic agents. And although they are recommended to take every single day if you have major depressive disorder or social phobia, or if you're plagued by generalized anxiety, or you have other issues that are at your baseline or that happen all the time, OCD, etc. Although that is the recommendation, you can take SSRIs PRN, and I have another video about that. And especially for certain symptoms like irritability, you can absolutely do that. PMS was treated, and premenstrual dysphoric disorder, even severe PMS, can be treated just on the days leading up to your period. And so you don't have to take the medication every day of the month. That is probably the better way to do it, but you can definitely do it this other way. And you can even do it, as far as irritability and anger goes, you could do it after the fact. You can do it after somebody upsets you, and you'll get over it faster when the medication kicks in. It works for most people at very low doses. And the same is actually true of anxiety. You can feel your anxiety come down a notch or two, even if you haven't been taking an SSRI, and if you take one, particularly one that's fairly potent like Paxil, or a good dosage of one, and when it really kicks in, you can feel yourself calm down, and you can feel yourself stopping the overthinking that often leads to anxiety or that will take you to the brink of a panic attack. I'd say the SSRIs on a PRN basis are the best treatment for performance anxiety. If you're going to take a PRN, you're probably better off with a benzodiazepine. That's guaranteed to work, and it will work on a PRN basis, on an as-needed basis. So it will work just a few minutes after you take it on an empty stomach. But then you have to worry about, well, if you're not used to taking benzodiazepines, you don't want to be sleepy right before you head into a meeting. You don't want any cognitive dulling right before you give a speech or right before you lead a talk. And so those are side effects of the benzodiazepines and certainly of alcohol. You have to procure a prescription to get Valium, but that is also a known remedy. What I want to talk about today is propranolol, because that's lesser known. It's well known to physicians, including non-psychiatrists. And so if you go to a competent primary care physician, they should know about propranolol's use, not just in lowering blood pressure, which would be their specialty, but in preventing migraine headaches, which you shouldn't have to be a neurologist to know that propranolol and that beta blockers in general are used for that. Beta blockers are also, because they are beta blockers, one of the things they do, so they block the beta adrenergic receptor subtype, the beta norepinephrine receptors. So in blocking norepinephrine, what you're going to do is you're going to block vasoconstriction. So that's the main mechanism by which it lowers blood pressure. But it also reduces the heart rate. So it blocks norepinephrine's effect on the heart, norepinephrine's chronotropic effect on the heart, which is to increase the heart rate. Because if the adrenal glands release adrenaline, which is epinephrine, then you're going to get the fight or flight response. And so you need that extra blood flow to either fight or get the hell out of there. And so you need more blood flow delivered to your muscular system so you can run or so you can punch. You need that added power. So if you block those receptors, then the effect on heart rate is going to be to reduce heart rate. Really think of it in terms of blocking adrenaline, because it's too much adrenaline that is causing the flop sweat. So you would block sweating, because when you increase norepinephrine, taking Wellbutrin for example, then one of the potential side effects is hyperhidrosis, is sweating bullets when you work out, because it's too much adrenaline. And so what you want to do when you're going in to give a talk and you're super nervous is you want to block the flop sweat. You don't want other people to see you sweating. You don't want other people to hear the quiver in your voice or the tremor, to see you trembling as you try to fumble your pages. And so by blocking the beta receptors, you reduce tremors, or hopefully block them altogether. You reduce the sweating, you reduce the heart rate. What you're reducing though are the symptoms of being super nervous in anticipation of something. And so it's just the outward signs of being nervous. The anxiety you're still going to feel. And that's the important thing to understand. Unlike alcohol and benzodiazepines, you're not reducing the anxiety itself. It's not anxiolytic. What you are busting up is not the anxiety, but the correlation to that anxiety. And so your brain is still telling your adrenal glands that there's danger, and so you're having a sympathetic discharge and you're going into fight or flight or freeze mode. It's anxiety because it doesn't make sense. It isn't life or death. You shouldn't have an increased heart rate, and you shouldn't have increased blood flow to your skeletal muscles, because all you're doing is giving a speech. But that's where things kind of go awry, and that's where sort of the modern world, it doesn't mesh well with millions of years of evolution, and you do think that it's life or death, and you are prepared for a fight or for an escape. You have this release from the adrenal glands, epinephrine, and then you have all the correlates, things you don't need, like fine motor skills that are impaired, because now you've got all this activation that you can't thread a needle because you have too much power to the skeletal muscles and you're shaking. It also happens when you tremble with rage, or you're so angry that you're shaking, your lip is quivering. It's because there's too much power. You wouldn't want other people to see your lip quivering, because then what that happens is you get a snowball effect where, oh, they can see the flop sweat. Oh, they can hear the quiver in my voice. Oh, they see me trembling. I had one patient who has severe social anxiety, and he said that his lip would start to quiver and he would start to stutter, and then that would make it 10 times worse. He would worry that other people could see the quivering lip and that they would notice that. And then that, of course, just compounded the anxiety. So it became like a runaway train. So propranolol helps. Low-dose propranolol helps. You take it just right before you go into the situation, because it doesn't impair you cognitively and you're not going to get sleepy, not like with these other remedies. But it will hopefully prevent or at least greatly diminish sweating, trembling, heart pounding, and any kind of shallow breathing that would also be a consequence of that. And because you don't need to be breathing faster, so you can take long, slow, deep breaths. Your body thinks it's life or death, even though your brain logically knows that it's not, but it's because you're terrified, mortified of being humiliated. So if your doctor doesn't recommend it and you have a big problem with performance anxiety and you don't want to be on an SSRI all the time and you can't take sedatives, then ask your doctor about beta blockers. Propranolol is the go-to agent. It's the one that's used. It's not a high potency agent, and so it would have less of a risk of causing hypotension, actually lowered blood pressure, so lowered that you get lightheaded or dizzy, or that you get dizzy when you stand up, or if you're dehydrated, or causing bradycardia, which is a heart rate that's too low. Definitely talk to your doctor, because if you've already got issues with bradycardia, for example, then you want to be careful about combining beta blockers with that. Or if you have asthma, you have to be careful about beta blockers, or even diabetes, because beta blockers can block the reaction that you would normally have to hypoglycemia, so it can mask hypoglycemia. These are concerns that I learned about when I was in medical school. They might not be as germane today if you've got a glucose monitor on all the time, but just depending on your situation. Talk to your doctor though, ask for propranolol. It's safe, it's effective. Just remember that it's not going to reduce your anxiety, it's just going to help you hide it better.